Can you pinpoint the 10 security gaps in your attack surface that account for 90% of your risk? It's impossible using a combination of scanners, pen tests, breach and attack simulation tools, and manual processes. But attackers can find your gaps. They perform recon and target the weaknesses with the best return. The Cycognito platform sees your external attack surface the way attackers do, eliminating blind spots. Powered by a global bot network, the Cycognito platform prioritizes your highest risk security gaps, integrates with existing workflows, and reduces operational costs. Visit securityweekly.com/Cycognito. Cybercriminals are using social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on victims, your employees, or your customers. Protect your Office 365 email from today's most sophisticated attacks with Barracuda Email Threat Scanner. It's a free tool to help protect your business from these hard-to-detect attacks. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner uses artificial intelligence to hunt and eliminate Office 365 email threats. Find the cybersecurity threats hiding in your Office 365 email right now. Get your free email threat scan at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Welcome back to Paul's Security Weekly. Security Weekly Unlocked will be an event held in person on December 5th through the 8th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista Hotel. The call for presentations deadline has been extended through July 5th. So get busy this weekend and submit us your talks. That's right, we're looking for people that maybe you have presented at a conference before, maybe you haven't presented at a conference before. We are open to all CFPs. We've got a list of topics in there that we're trying to fill out talk titles and CFPs for. So make sure that you check out securityweekly.com/unlocked. Submit us your presentations so you can be with us in person in December in sunny Florida. On to the Security Weekly news. Where do we want to start? Another print spooler vulnerability, a Netgear bypass, NFC flaws, print spooler, print spooler. Let's start with
or LinkedIn, one of the two.
You know, I feel like I've seen print spooler vulnerabilities and exploits before. I'm like, this, like, it's ringing a bell, and like I'm typing it up, and I'm like, oh yeah, Stuxnet gave us one in 2010. That's where I know that one from. And they didn't
fix it.
Didn't fix all the vulnerabilities in the print spooler. This one is interesting because there was a newly discovered print spooler bug discovered by Sangfor researchers that wasn't the same hole that was fixed on Patch Tuesday. The Sangfor crew inadvertently documented an as-yet disclosed remote code execution vulnerability because the original vulnerability that was patched was a privilege escalation flaw.
Right.
And so Sangfor goes, oh, well, they fixed it, so we'll release it. But Sangfor's had an RCE for that and unintentionally unleashed a zero-day exploit.
Well, they thought that was the one they fixed, but it wasn't. And so, they were like, oh, here it is. Yeah, we're going to report on it now. And it was like, oh, no, they didn't fix this. And
we just couldn't ask for a more newsworthy story.
That's a bad
We
day.
get to say Stuxnet. We get to talk about Stuxnet. We get to talk about print spoolers.
Print spoolers.
Good old print spoolers.
That's a really old... What? That's a really old service, right? That's kind of what we were alluding to on ESW when I was... kind of probing that SDLC and kind of how do you work in legacy code into that agile testing platform and model so that you're looking at things that have had to be carried forward, such as services like print spooler. Every OS has all these legacy and backwards compatibility things that tend to lend themselves to things that go really, really bad when they go bad. And print spooler is one of those.
You had a recipe for disaster, Tyler, to kind of back up what you're saying, right? You've got legacy code that was likely developed in a more waterfall style model that lends itself to having lots of vulnerabilities in a different world. You've got it associated with the print spooler service, which has already had vulnerabilities exploited within it. And it's a print spooler. So, by nature, it has to take unstructured or structured data. It takes data from, the user and has to process it, which is always a recipe for disaster.
And it has to take data from lots of apps at the same time that are in different formats.
And maybe not even interact with a printer. I mean, do you hit the print spooler when you like convert your print job to PDF? Like that, does that hit the same code? Maybe not.
Does it? I don't know.
Because the print dialog comes up. Because mostly,
it's a print job, so I guess it's
mostly I don't print shit, right? I bring up the print dialog and I'm like print to PDF, and then I digitally modify it.
It would be an interesting thing to test. I don't. You think it
that might. Hits the print spooler in the same way because you're leveraging the same API call to the back end, right? Where the spooler service is actually making that API call to handle the legacy code, and that's where you're running into problems, at least for this particular one.
It made me think about the S-bomb for Windows. I was like, it's going to be like volume 19 of 36, it's like, because it's like all between, all the code, all the APIs, all the old code, all the new code, and they're going to have to try to put all that stuff in there so they can sell Windows to the government.
And I mean, quite frankly, this code was developed when largely printers were directly connected to computers and not necessarily on the network. Yeah, I mean they were.
I mean it's old. Sure, that's old code. Yeah, I mean I know they've.
And there's a lot of bad advice around this one too. That's kind of the other problem we're running into is everyone doesn't really understand Active Directory and how the print spooler is being abused. Like first you have the print spooler being abused on domain controllers. You should probably turn off print spooler on your domain controllers. That's like a pretty generic piece of advice. However, it's very rarely used unless you're doing something like print pruning or printer pruning inside of Active Directory, where it's wiping out old printers via Active Directory advertisement stuff. Other than that, on domain controllers, that's probably something you don't need.
Yeah. Why is it even on? Why is it on by default on domain controllers?
It's on everything by default.
So it's on everything by default.
That's pretty much, it's a printer function. That's kind of one of the legacy pieces that most systems need.
It's one of those things I think they couldn't conceptualize not having, even though it's not needed.
I set up a domain controller, and it has all my... This was what it like back in the day. I set up my Windows 2000 domain controller, and it has a huge file share attached to it. And, oh, by the way, it also handles the printing, right? I mean, that's what traditionally... I wonder if
it's used for other stuff, too. I mean, I've never looked at the source code for that, but I wonder what else it does. I mean, are there others?
Printer pruning is about the only thing from an Active Directory standpoint, like from an Active Directory traditional standpoint. Obviously, each AD is kind of different. But eliminating that just on DCs, that obviously eliminates your high risk or, high privilege system. That doesn't necessarily mitigate the problem with print spooler running on other systems. And then you combine something like unconstrained delegation, where you're using unconstrained delegation and relaying to print spoolers on other servers to then get code execution. So this is a much bigger problem that's going to have to be addressed in different ways.
And I might be wrong about this, but since I got Tyler, wasn't there a time when they had like sort of open print spoolers because they were setting up this is quite old, but they were setting up machines that were primarily used as print consolidators, so that you could, because you had to plug a printer directly into a computer. There wasn't any network printing, so you had this machine that was sitting somewhere in the building and it had a shared print spooler, so everybody in the network could push
print jobs.
They pushed all those print jobs into print spooler, and it was managing.
It would do that. It would spool up all your print jobs.
So it was like an open app that everybody could push jobs to through the network.
Yes.
And there's still devices very similar to that, and even you start to talk about back not even that long ago when you're looking at things like 2008 Small Business Edition, where you did have a file share, you did have the domain controller, and you did have the print server all running on the same device. Like there are use cases in which this has been done and maybe still being used in that manner. That doesn't actually bode well for Active Directory security.
I'll bet that thing's embedded in all kinds of like ICS stuff and things where they had like back-end systems that print, they print error codes, they print error logs out that are really, because I've seen those things sitting around. I mean, I'm not talking about 20 years ago. I'm talking about recent, and you walk into a factory and there's an old, a dot matrix printer sitting there on a table that's been sitting there for 25 years and it's still sitting there and it's still being used every day. And those things have print spoolers.
Because as we all know that when you've worked in IT, like we have and many of our listeners, is that once you got a printer and a print server running, Damn, you don't want to touch that because you break the printer and people get really mad.
Ooh, I know where I've seen that. I was thinking, I've seen it. We were just talking about the DMV.
Yes.
I was at the DMV, and guess what? They got an old dot matrix printer sitting up there with that triple carbon paper on tractor feed, and they had an old computer sitting there attached to it with a parallel cable, printing out those car registrations on the fly. Things probably running Windows XP.
You're looking for. Move along.
Yeah, and it was funny. I was explaining it today that a lot of these older technologies get kind of bundled in, and I was building a package, and the serial port library wasn't building, and I'm like, well, that kind of relates because a USB HID device may use a serial port kind of communications, and the intern's looking at me like. I'm like, you don't know what a serial port is, do you?
He's like, what's a serial port, Grandpa?
Like, it does not involve milk and substances that come from a box.
So there was one article I ran across on this one that looked semi-decent where they said, put an ACL on the Windows System 32 spool driver directory where the DLL gets dropped to prevent anything from being dropped in there until you get a patch. Kind of interesting because they said they couldn't find any way the DLL worked in a different directory.
Then all your printing stops.
You might as well just disable
No, I don't think so.
No?
It's just
Okay.
You're taking away write permissions, so you can't drop new DLLs in, but what's in there can run.
Oh, okay.
So if you're pwned, you're screwed, but assumably you're still clean. It just seemed reasonable. I added it as my story 13, and I was having so much fun, I added it as my story 14 as well.
Really like that story.
Yeah, apparently.
The advice that I read was to turn off the print spooler service.
Yeah, that's the number one advice, by the way. That is still.
So that works on the DC, obviously, but this is still, you can still get remote code execution as any user to any other computer, like from Windows 7 to Windows 10, up to most of the Windows servers. So obviously, something like Exchange, from an attack standpoint, I wouldn't go after DC just because of logging and the advanced heuristics that are going to be there. I would go after Exchange, where all those credentials pretty much live anyway, and there's a lot of traffic that I can blend into. So, yeah, making sure that that's done properly is, monitoring for spawning of child processes by the print service. Obviously, is going to give you some good detection. GPOs for firewall rules on places that don't need 135.445 and/or disabling print spooler. This is still going to be an issue for a little while, and I see ransomware ticking up and utilizing this for worm capability very, very soon.
And be careful if you're trying to turn off print spooler that you really turned it off, because it is really hard to turn off.
Really?
You have to disable it. If you just stop it, it can restart. Stuff can trigger it to run
restart.
Again. Yeah, it will restart. So you have to be. Obviously,
I feel like it was the same way in Linux and Unix too. Like trying to kill the cup.
Oh hell yeah!
The cup service was like really,
it's like in there.
Yeah.
It's in there good. It wants to start. It is really hard to disable it. It's you can stop it, but it wants to start back up again. And if it gets a call, it will. Because
I remember I now remember doing it on Unix and Linux systems where I really wanted all the processing power and I really wanted to turn off services that I wasn't using.
Yep.
And I'm like, no one is using these servers to print, but I want to say Solaris in particular would enable cups by default. Or Linux, early Linux systems definitely did.
Oh, so did
but I want to say Solaris did too, right?
Cups, yeah.
And I'm like, why by default is even outside of Windows? I can't even pick on Windows for
people print.
Yeah, people want to print,
and they don't want you calling going, I can't print. The printer doesn't work, because then you have to have help desk just for the printer. So they put all that stuff in there, and then it's really hard to get. That's what I meant. It's really hard to get rid of common services that have been around a long time. Even unless you literally disable it so that it cannot start, and that's sometimes a challenge. So you got to be careful about that.
Jeff, we lost your video. I don't know if you're running the print spooler service or not.
You just shrank to a small. Shrank to a small dot of light.
So I think this was a huge story, right? I think this is one of the bigger ones that made the news. However, I think this kind of overshadowed a story, in my opinion, that was even more prevalent and actually a lot more scary, and that's the one from Eclipsium. Like I don't know. Like I'm trying to pull up the story list. I don't know if anybody actually linked that one, but the story from Eclipsium and
we talked about that. Yeah, you know why, Tyler? We talked about it last week.
Okay. See, that's what happens when I miss weeks.
I do the same thing, dude. I'm fault you at all.
You remember? Yep. I do it all the time. Like remembering stories, going, well, that was a big story, and then it's like, oh no, it was 2 weeks ago. Sorry.
Yep. The Eclipsium one was big. That was the Dell.
The Dell back. It was the Dell update feature that's got. Yeah, I mean that thing's and that's on. They in that story was like 30 million devices have that bug in them, and
that's probably conservative too.
Yeah, I would call that extremely conservative because I was just going through my house looking for Dell. It's like how many Dell devices have we got? Mm-hmm. It was several. Yeah.
Oh, what was the LinkedIn story? Was this the API bug in LinkedIn?
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually watching that drop. In fact, I grabbed a bunch of the sample files like minutes once they dropped and been trying to procure the rest of them. And it's good data.
Yeah, that was the rest of my data that wasn't already exposed. So I was like, I've given up now.
700 million records is, I think, is what my last count was.
Is it more than what you can view in someone's LinkedIn profile if you're on LinkedIn and connected to someone?
So it depends on your connection level and your ability to. So your level of connection allows you to view certain levels of data. So sometimes you can see the name, sometimes you can see the company. But this is basically everything associated with the profile.
Yep. Okay. So if you're
and then there's cleaner versions of it that they scrape where it's just they've correlated email, name, places you've worked, and any other information you provided LinkedIn. So it was a pretty good API scrape. It was just like the Clubhouse scrape, right? Like it's exposed APIs just like we talked about on ESW. Like an API is going to be a nightmare for a very long time because it exposes more data than what's available in the GUI.
Yep. LinkedIn has their work cut out for them. I mean, they've been the target so many times because they have the good stuff.
So much data.
They have so much data.
Yeah. And people really share with LinkedIn because it's a job search routine, and people, I think, are more inclined when they say, I need a job, and it's got all these options to fill out, and you're going, I'm going to put everything in here because I don't want to not get a job over this. So.
LinkedIn makes you feel good when more information you give them. Like, your profile's not complete.
Yeah, and it's a professional, I'm making air quotes, but it's a professional social media service. So I think people, again, have a different comfort level with that than they do with some, wacky, where you put up cat pictures. They feel like, well, I can put my data in here. It's a professional service, and I'm going to put my whole resume in here. I'm going to put my home phone number in here. I'm going to put my home address.
Stupid question. Is LinkedIn? Did Microsoft buy LinkedIn or no?
I don't know.
Did someone buy LinkedIn? Are they owned by another company?
Someone bought. Yeah, they are owned by another company. I don't remember who bought them though.
I thought it was Mike.
Was it Microsoft or ABC? The ABC Corp.
It's a guy named Bert Microsoft, from New Jersey.
26 billion they bought LinkedIn for.
There you go.
I see. Where I was going with that was I would have think that they would have learned something from Microsoft in terms of security.
Different division.
It's a different division.
Yeah, they probably had one meeting.
Well, and Microsoft's buying it for the data.
To resell.
Yeah.
So I just ran across an interesting story that came in my inbox from my credit union CEO. Apparently, NCR is going to start offering Bitcoin purchases through their hardware, like their ATMs.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Hasib was just talking about that.
Well, yeah, he had those BTMs, and so I guess, they may buy him.
Right? Yeah, that's something.
Buy him out, boys.
I just thought that was interesting. Bitcoin's getting more mainstream. Damn it!
It is. Next thing you know, we'll all be carrying around Bitcoins in our pockets.
Oh, just back to the LinkedIn thing. So, someone went through the trouble to scrape 700 million users from. But you imagine the protections that LinkedIn has on their API, and I'm not just talking about like the code behind the API, which is obviously was the weak point, but there's a lot of barriers to get around the API. I mean, LinkedIn's API especially is very, locked down. If you need to go get a key and go do something, like you get nothing. I did it. I pulled a development LinkedIn API key and did some development work, and like you get.
They've got bot detectors, scrape protection.
Yeah, and on the public side, right, they've got all that stuff that you have to bypass. So that was I'm interested to read the write-up. It was very similar to, Tyler, I sent you the write-up from last week where they were bypassing the Apple. They were able to brute force the passcode for the
that one was super
reset.
Interesting,
wasn't it?
With the math and how they were doing the IP rotation for the particular numbers that they were trying to get. Like, I like that one.
I think I
like their approach.
Yeah, a lot of the research in that one was just like a one-liner in the article, like, oh, we found cloud providers that aren't automatically blocked by Apple, and we're able to spin up 28,000 different IP addresses.
And there's only four, four servers to hit, so it's just simple math at that point.
Right.
Math and time.
Mm-hmm. That's what everything boils down to.
I mean, but it just goes to show you that if you're playing whack-a-mole as part of your security strategy, it's not going to work. Or like Apple said, like, you shouldn't be doing a password reset. Like, if you're an Apple user, you're probably not going to come from an AWS registered IP address to reset your password, right? Like, you're coming from your ISP, so they're taking out huge swaths of that. But like, that didn't really matter. I'd imagine LinkedIn has probably done similar kinds of things, right?
Probably.
Well, they've limited even like their source code and like the obfuscation in that. We used to be able to scrape LinkedIn fairly easily, with simple account and ID correlations and source code scrapes, and they've went to great lengths to add a lot of JavaScript obfuscation, add a lot of backend correlation data, API correlation data. So they've went to great lengths to kind of secure that, and that still shows like playing that whack-a-mole game does not always end up well.
Yeah,
because you're going to always fight this.
You know who LinkedIn lets scrape their data? That's Google and Bing can scrape their data, and then all the data's in Google.
So you
and
just
Bing.
scrape Google.
So you a lot of scripts I've seen used by folks such as yourselves, right? And pen testers don't go to LinkedIn directly because it's too much of a pain in the ass. Like, just go to Google and pull a Google API key and do that. And then when Google bans that
Google
key, go get a new key.
Rights.
What's that?
Yeah, your Google gets specific rights, so you actually get full name because they're using a key that has basically first connection rights to view that first connection data for the headline, and you click on it, and then you have to actually log in. But if you just scrape that and that's all you're after is first and last name, then that's kind of all you need. So
right. I mean, you see that as a user too. If you want to find someone on LinkedIn, I don't go to LinkedIn and search for their name. I go to Google and I search their name and I put LinkedIn after it, and it's usually like the
Yep. Get a much better hit.
Mm-hmm.
No, you're absolutely right. Not to mention they all keep adding apps and other things which also have APIs, and like you say, I mean, you can go through Google, but then LinkedIn is always adding new services and new features and all this other stuff. So it's back to that SBOM problem of what is the supply chain of this code, and how many APIs are in this long chain that nobody can figure out anyway. So
some of the really cool research I've seen is around getting around those APIs. Yeah, some of the cool bug bounties and stuff that have been paid out is really
I mean, it's just so convoluted that it's really tough as a security analyst to look at. I mean, when I used to be a systems analyst, I was looking at code. It was hard enough just when you had 4 or 5 programmers working on a large project to look at all the code and different style. You start talking about all these APIs and libraries and all this stuff bolted onto these
microservices,
and then there's stuff APIs bolted onto those things and bolted onto those things, and it's like, how can anybody even begin to fathom all this and sort through it? I mean, it's a huge job. And companies don't want to dedicate the kind of resources it would take to even begin to analyze
You'd
this stuff.
think companies like Netgear, in a much smaller code base on firmware, could eradicate these vulnerabilities, right? Because that's a great example, Doug. You look at like what LinkedIn must have for code with microservices and cloud native services and all that stuff is massive. And now you're going down to a teeny little router where the file system, the bootloader, the operating system, and the web server, and all is all in one neat little.
But I can explain that from a systems analysis perspective too.
Yeah,
it's called marketing promised that version 7 would be out on Friday, and we have to get this working. Make it work. Well, we were going to do a security audit. Make it work tonight. But I mean, there's a security. We haven't had a chance to go make it work tonight.
But we were going to rewrite the HTTP server and all the web
forget
server
that. We'll do that in version 2. Just push it right now. Commit.
So I pull the web code and the HTTPD server from my previous project, which I know has lots of vulnerabilities. I push it out, and lo and behold, And so I got this snippet not from the article, but from the actual Microsoft researcher post that discovered these vulnerabilities. And it was basically, they took a really quick look at the reverse engineering the HTTPD binary and discovered actually, no, that's not the one. That's Netgear. I want the blog post from Microsoft. Yes. So this is Microsoft finds new Netgear firmware vulnerabilities that could lead to identity theft and full system compromise. This was their 365 Defender research team publishing this. I mean, those
guys are on fire.
And this is how most of us would approach reverse engineering firmware.
Yeah.
I download the firmware, and guess what tool they used? They ran binwalk against it. It's like, training wheels for reverse engineering firmware, I don't want to downplay what binwalk is, because, the team behind that we've had on the show. I think Craig Hefner and team is the ones behind binwalk, right? And they're like, so we're focused on the HTTPD server, and lo and behold, they reverse engineered it and they posted the pseudocode. And it's the part of the code where it says, hey, if the GET request or POST request matches one of these, then don't bother applying authentication. And due to the way the code was structured, they used a stir check, and they're able to construct a URL that's like, go to WAN _WAN HTM ? It will ignore the parameter after the question mark and just load the page that allows you to configure the router. And they basically ended it there. And the ending sentence to this is a complete and fully reliable authentication bypass.
Yeah.
It is like the most ridiculously simple vulnerability. To say it's exploitable, it's like it's like a feature, not even an exploit. This is a feature.
They put it in there on purpose.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm telling you, the days are gone when you should assume that somebody won't figure anything out. And this was a big obvious one, but somebody's out there pounding on it the minute it comes out, and somebody will find the hole. So you better stop assuming that nobody will figure it out.
It's just, I've purposely tried for like the past year not to cover ridiculous IoT device vulnerabilities, but when I read this one, I was like, oh my God, this crap is still happening.
It's still happening.
And you can use the authentication bypass to dump the entire configuration of the router and get the password.
Not? Yeah, because it's right there in plain text.
Let's wave our phones at the ATMs to hack them.
You get the key that used the DES encryption for the backup.
Yeah.
This allows an attacker to get the plaintext password, which is stored in the encrypted NVRAM remotely.
Yep.
Oh, boy.
It's like dumping old Cisco confs.
Mm-hmm.
When you see there's a password for the whole system, and they probably used that as root on all their servers too.
That's the enable password as well.
That was one of my, wow, you're a genius kind of moments where somebody was like, wow, how did you hack us? And I'm like, well, you had all your Cisco confs in this binder, and I was just flipping through it, and the enable password you used on every system is also your root password on every single thing in your whole company. So, but I didn't tell them that. I was like, yes, I'm a genius. High-level mathematics were used to figure this out. So.
Oh my God, that's so.
Just how high were you, Doug?
And it's like, you're some sort of genius. No, I'm not. I can read.
Mm-hmm.
I know how to select a binder marked Cisco confs off the shelf.
And it's just like so much easier to pwn the organization when you've got full enable access to their Cisco
pretty much.
gear. Like that just makes your job really easy.
It really helps. Yeah,
it helps a lot.
I found that's an awfully easy thing, especially when they use that password as all their logins for their remote dial-ups and everything else.
That too.
But it was a good password.
It was a good password. It was a good password. It was really strong. It was like 20 characters. It was like random, and they were like, "How did you figure that out?" And you're just like,
I'm a genius.
I am a genius. I have this mathematical ability in my brain to do advanced vector math.
You could have admitted one slight problem. I said your password was so good I had to use copy and paste.
Well, I did have to type it because it was on paper. So.
Oh crap!
Yeah, I know they made me work for it, but wrote it down in my little book. And
Yeah.
that was the old-fashioned copy and paste.
There it is.
They really did, though. The guy really did say, how did you get this? I need you to tell me how, because we told him we have all your passwords. And he was like, how did you get this? I've got to know.
And you really just pulled a binder off the shelf?
Literally, we were doing an audit. We went in, and in the IT space, there were all these binders, and I always look at them, because I want to see what they are. And there was a binder that said Cisco configurations, and they had printed them all out and put them in the binder. So it was, backup.
They were very organized.
Yeah, they were very organized, very helpful. And I took the binder down and was just flipping through it. And, of course, I was immediately looking for enable passwords and things, and they were all right there, baby. And they hadn't run that nice little service maintenance tool and encrypted them. And so they were just plain text right there on the paper.
I find it
even so, you still had to use your iPad, didn't you?
That's right.
I find sometimes though that in history, some clients that were expecting a more of like enumerate all your vulnerabilities, and I'm sure you guys have seen this and experienced this, and they're kind of like mad that you hacked them like that.
Oh, yeah.
I remember being on a test and like I just walked through all of their systems because you get one SSH private key and then it's trusted on all their systems, and I'm like, now I have accounts on all of your systems and I'm using the SSH trust you've established in all your systems to walk through them all and get all the data. And they're just, sometimes that's met with just like frustration because they're like, well, I thought you were going to find like all these like fancy vulnerabilities, and it's like, no, I used like common sense and hacking to do that. And
where's the James Bond shit?
Yeah, they're kind of mad. They're like, well, where's the fancy exploits?
There is a follow-on to this story. So they were very mad that I did this, and their defense was nobody could get those because you had to be in the IT space to get them. So they were secure. And so the next year when we did the audit, I went, because I had noticed these things the year before, I went over there at 3 o'clock in the morning.
In a ski mask?
I did not wear a ski mask. I drove my rental car over there at 3 in the morning because they propped the back door open after hours to keep the airflow through there. And I just strolled in there at 3 o'clock in the morning, walked down to where those binders were and got the binder and wrote the new password down in my notebook and took it back to the hotel with me. And then I went in and changed all the passwords to got you again. Yeah. They were equally unhappy.
Yes. Again, Doug has an unhappy customer.
I was saying they love me. Come on. That was the one when I climbed over the firewall too. Over the first year, I guessed the crypto code on their server room because the paint was worn off the buttons, and so the next year. They had bought a really fancy door that had a thumbprint code on it, and I again got into the server room and took a picture of myself with the phone and sent it to the CIO, and I said, "Nice door, doesn't work." And he called me it was about 3:30 in the morning. He called me and he was like, "Okay," he's like, we actually have an insurance policy on that door. I want to know how you got past that door." And I said, "I cut off a guy's thumb and used it on the pad." And he was dead serious. He was like, "That shouldn't work because of the heat sensor." And I said, "Oh, you have a microwave in the break room." And he was like, "Wait, this can't be right." Like,
but a lot of the physical testing just never ceases to amaze me. It's just an amazing form of hacking because you could have said, "I went into the break room and I got a butter knife and I got through their fancy." You don't even need what's the metal, it looks like a Slim Jim, but it kind of has a hook on it kind of tool. What is that called? I don't remember what it's called now. I'm having a mental blank. But it's basically like credit carding a door.
It's a Slim Jim.
There's a tool for it.
Slim Jim. Yeah. You just reach it around and it pulls the door handle down. Yeah, it's a really handy little tool.
There's just a lot of cool physical pen testing stories.
You know how fast you can get a programmer to give you a bunch of information if you take one of those
batteries with nipple clamps?
You don't need nipple clamps. You get one of those. You get one of those things they use on you when they say clear. Yeah. What is that thing?
Yeah.
You just put that on somebody a couple times, and they'll tell you anything you want to know. It's just like.
Or you get a blonde with about,
Oh, that's a much more effective but much more expensive solution. But yeah, it works really, really. I went to the training for that one, and you know what I said at the training when they were telling me about that? They were like, "Now, when a beautiful person who you're attracted to approaches you in a bar and begins, and I was like, if that ever happens, I'll know it's a KGB agent." And she's probably he was like, you think you'll know, but you probably won't. I was like, no, if a beautiful person I'm attracted to ever approached me in a bar, I would know it was a KGB agent, because that's never ever happened.
That never happened.
You would know.
I would know that's not real.
You'd know that she was going to inject you with some metal, and when you were the security guard from Magneto,
there's only one of two things that could possibly be. The next one is like, it's $1,000 a night and you cash up front, or it's a KGB agent. There was no other answer to that question, so I was like, yeah, I'm not going for that one.
Hey, it could be
either
both.
Rohypnol or.
Yeah, it's physical security has so many parallels into the cybersecurity.
It's the same stuff. It's just done in a different way. Social engineering remotely is the same kind of thing. It's just a different. Yeah, it's the same mindset though. It's still just about how do I get around this obstacle, and the easiest way is always going to be I called down there, got the number of the server room, and called somebody, told them I was from the fire inspection. That kind of stuff, and it still works because it always worked. And it will probably
what I loved about the Darknet Diaries episode where they chronicled the physical pen tester. Tyler, Joff, did you guys listen to that one?
No, I didn't.
I have not.
So so I'll just close because I talked about it last week. So if you haven't listened to it by now, stop listening now and go listen to that episode where he interviews two physical pen testers, because it's a great story. And essentially, I like how they described how. People don't think you can buy a ladder that you can put in checked bags that collapses down, and you can buy a wool blanket, and then you can buy the ladder that has ropes attached, like a fire escape ladder, and that is all you need to get over a barbed wire fence. So you use the first ladder to get up, you throw your blanket over, and in this case they had noticed a shed that was in line with the fence.
And that's convenient.
They're like, I'll use the shed because it's more stable rather than risking myself on this fence. So they're on top of the shed, but he dropped his fire escape ladder. So now he's kind of stuck on top of the shed. And he's like, 12 feet. And he looks to his left, and there was a university next door to the place that they were doing the physical pen test on. And the university police were not informed that this test was going on. So they're like, if this person catches us, we could be really screwed, because even our get out of jail free card might not work with the university police, because that could be scary. And so he's like, I'm gonna jump. He's like, it's only 12 feet, it'll be fine. Now he lands on his feet and immediately experiences extremely severe pain in both of his heels. He's like, I'm gonna tough through it. And I think the testing would have gone better had he not, in that moment, actually fractured both of his heels, and had to carry on with the rest of the physical pen test. There were two people, and so at certain points after that, when they went to the next, he's like, I can't walk. He's like, I'm just gonna have to play lookout in the car while you go do the rest. And then his partner in crime, air quotes crime, wasn't successful, but. Even so, they went to the ER, and I asked my wife about this because she works in medical imaging, and I'm like, so he broke both his heels, but when he went to the ER, they told him he didn't, and she's like, hairline fractures, you can make sure you got a radiologist. Yeah. And as I know from my wife, when you go in off hours, you don't necessarily get the attending radiologist or a radiologist to read your films.
They get the guy that cleans up the cafeteria who just happened to be there.
He's like, no, there's no fractures.
You'll be fine.
A hairline, much like we're looking at logs and have to find the needle in the stack of needles, it's the same thing we're looking at a medical image. And so they gave him some pain meds, but they're like, we still got to do this test, and used his crutches the next morning as part of a social engineering to get on the elevator. I have to use the elevator because I'm on crutches, kind of thing. God. I was like, much respect, man. I wish I
had thought of that. That's good. I never thought of that.
He really was injured, but it kind of makes you think when you do your physical pen test to bring some crutches with you.
Yeah,
maybe a boot to really play it up.
Oh, and a boot's removable. It's not even like Silence of the Lambs, where the guy actually had a cast on his arm and stuff. It's just like a boot. You can unbolt it later and take it off, and switch to your janitor costume.
Just great. And I feel bad because the story was great because he was injured. Like, that's what kind of made the... So, Tyler, Joff, Doug, when you're doing physical pen
we'll go
tests,
check it out.
Like, please don't get injured while you're doing it, because
I haven't done a physical in such a long time. We have people for that now.
right. You're too old. You're out of the rotation, Joff. They need the younger, more spry.
Hey, people that can jump off a 12-foot roof.
Enough,
well, now you're like all tough. You can crawl through an air duct and stuff.
Yeah.
Here comes Joff, like with his Zippo lighter.
The getting up the buildings are the easy part. It's the getting back down 3 stories that sucks.
Yes.
But we do have some classic stories at Black Hills at some of the tests. I can't tell them, but there are some really amazing things that have happened.
Physical pen tests make for really good stories, right? Hopefully no one was injured, though.
No, nobody's been injured, but there's some epic stories.
NFC flaw. Oh, where did Lee go?
Oh, he's a blank wall now. He got frustrated with our physical pen testing stories.
So no, that wasn't the problem.
NFC flaws let researchers hack ATMs by waving a phone. I don't remember his first name because I didn't put the quote in the article, but Rodriguez is his last name. He works for IOActive. Built an Android app. Allows the smartphone to mimic credit card NFC transmissions, basically. Waves his phone and can exploit a variety of bugs to crash point-of-sale devices, hack them to collect and transmit credit card data, invisibly change the value of transactions. That's interesting. And even lock devices while displaying a ransomware message. He can even force at least one brand of ATMs to dispense cash, but that only works in a combination with additional bugs. He spent over a year doing this research. I'm assuming he's going to present it at Black Hat.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That's dedication. Yeah, I'm sure that NFC stuff was not fun to work with.
We've known there's stuff in NFC. It's just like you said, it takes a lot of time and energy to do that research, and then the chained attacks that you end up having to get down to, the level you have to get down to for NFC and those kind of attacks, is very, very specific. It's expensive hardware to get a hold of. It's a pain in the ass to break down at that level, and then to look for the exploits, that's not easy. I'm excited to see this one.
Me too.
Yeah.
So this attack requires not only a specially crafted, what do they call it, APDU. You can't read EMV chip data. You can only read mag stripe, but half the people put their mag stripe in anyway, so you're good to go there. And like you said, jackpotting requires an additional vulnerability in the ATM. It will be very interesting to see what he presents.
Yeah. Although he said he couldn't present a lot of it because it's an NDA, and
because they got to fix that stuff first. Yeah, and as difficult it was to find the vulnerabilities, you can imagine the implementation, right? The patches and
there's
fixes
like
for
800 million ATMs around. So
yep.
And these are big manufacturers too,
right? So they're not going to want this stuff disclosed. So until they can replace,
and just like the sheer number too,
that's what I mean. You think about how many ATMs there are within like 5 miles of where we are right now, that somebody's got to replace some kind of maybe firmware or hardware or both, and that's not a simple job.
No.
And it's really a function that adding the NFC reader to the system allowed for the exploit path, because without it, that buffer overflow wasn't possible. I thought that was kind of interesting. Watch the technology you bolt on, right?
Yep, same thing.
How do we convince our boss that cybersecurity includes Active Directory? What's your guys' advice?
What?
Active Directory is secure by default, right? You just turn it on and it works.
Well, just a fancy LDAP server. What do you mean?
That's what I was told, was that Active Directory in and of itself is completely secure. And I mean, you just turn it on and put the users in, and you're good to go.
And it's so good. You can store everything in it. Like, that's right. Everything you could possibly imagine, you can put in it. And
you can put all the root passwords in the notes field. Yes.
But you have to imagine that there are, let me use the term boss here, right? Business owners that on paper you've invested in Active Directory, and they're like, what do you mean I have to spend extra time and money and resources on this security thing? How do you get them around? It's a rhetorical kind of question, right?
I mean,
you're going to come up against these these kind of, I mean, this article is written by Simperis. It's a company that I really, really like in terms of being able to do Active Directory backup and restores. Tyler, Geoff, looks like they get the thumbs up from you. I don't know if you've seen this kind. I like Simperis. You can disagree with me. It's totally fine. You're on mute, Tyler. Tyler, you're on mute.
I don't know if I've seen them on a large environment, actually. And Active Directory backups are one of those things that is very easy to say you do and very, very expensive to recover from and get right. And there's very few companies that do that well. So this is one I'll have to have a look at.
What Simperis says is the native Active Directory backups work great if you're staying within like the same environment, right? Like if you're on-premise, you can back up and restore to on-premise. If you need to if you're in the cloud, you need to back up and restore in the cloud. What their technology allows you to do is back up between those environments. This was years ago that I briefed with them as well, which means my memory's not so great either, but that was part of the pitch.
AD backups, like Microsoft usually ends up having to come in and help the vendor do some very sophisticated things to get that to restore properly and actually be functional. Like there's backups, and you can always back up those databases and directories, but to get them to restore to a functioning state, if not done right, costs a lot of money.
And that's
backup is not a backup. A backup is the ability to, like what we're talking about is the difference between a backup and a restore.
Yes.
And when I dug into like what restoring looks like, it's exactly what you said, Tyler. It's like, like restoring is also a thing, but like restoring to a functional state is a completely different thing.
People make that assumption that they had a long time ago, which is that just all you do is copy it and put it back in, and it's going to work. But that is not true. It's not true at all anymore. And and I've seen that. And the restore is the critical thing that you have to test, and you have to put that in play on a regular basis to make sure it actually is going to work. And that's very expensive.
Because we've all seen it in all different types of systems. Oh, I did a backup and then I did a restore, not realizing that, there were some hidden files in there. There were some configuration files that either didn't get backed up or got older copies backed up and now are not compatible with the system I'm restoring on.
There's hashes. There may be hashes on a machine that when those hashes aren't restored or they're restored differently because you have different hardware, they no longer work. And those machines won't talk to each other anymore. And that's a huge issue. And then, of course, we always go on and on about out-of-band backups. And you've got to, if your backups get corrupted by malware or they get corrupted on site, even though you had them and the restores typically work, now they're all ransom too. And now what do you do?
And the author's point here too, I think, is good ammunition for us and data points to use. And he says, everything relies on Active Directory. Now we know that. The business owners and executives may not understand how that plays out. And so what he says is, he uses the term boss again, right? Your business leaders may say development has to be running 100% of the time and really put the focus on the software, maybe your app's running in AWS, and put all of it on there. But if Active Directory goes down, that impacts your development, right? Like when Active Directory is down, it's tough to function as a company.
And a lot of bosses don't understand how pervasive and enmeshed Active Directory becomes because they still think about it in terms of it's just this database that's got all these things in it. And so you back it up and you restore it, and it's just like an old spreadsheet database. But it's not. It's this very enmeshed, entrenched thing that's secured, and it's designed not to let you inject rogue things into it. And it's not as simple, but so it's really tough to convince them.
Oops, developers can't log into the management console in AWS because guess what? That was federated through Active Directory.
Exactly. and it's tough to... You already used a bunch of words they don't understand.
I did not use very business-friendly language.
And it's hard to find business-friendly language to explain all that. Right. And it's just like when they call you and say, what does tombstone mean? And you're like, it means, a tombstone, like you're buried underneath it? That's what it means. It's bad. And that's where you are right now. So you're in the grave, and you're going to have to somehow become a zombie and come back to life, but you're probably not. So, good luck with that. But, this stuff is terrifying, and it's so hard to explain because it is so complex and it's so enmeshed. And it's hard to understand even for technical people. There's a lot of moving parts there. Even in a small system, there's a lot of moving parts. You expand that to the cloud, and you've got locations all over the place, and they're all interacting. Good luck.
And as Tyler and I have had multiple comments, like Azure AD is not an easy thing to understand, configure, implement, deploy, and maintain. Like, I come to you with questions sometimes, and you're like, yeah, no, that's not like straightforward, right? Like, there's a lot of nuances there. I don't know if nuance is the right word, but this is tricky stuff.
Active Directory, I mean, there's a reason there's only so many Active Directory professionals in the world, because even those people that manage it or do ops on it, or even build it, the levels of the onion that you peel back as you start to talk about each individual piece of that, they're very specifically niched specialties in each of those areas, because it's so crazy. I mean, you've got protocols, you've got encryption, you've got directories, you've got servers that live on those things. All of those things kind of play into Active Directory, and it keeps getting more and more complicated. You add cloud, you add federation, you add Active Directory Connect, you add syncs, you add Azure AD, whether or not those are syncing hybrid. There's a ton to Active Directory as a whole, and so when someone just says we've deployed Active Directory and it's the latest, it should be secure, that's usually a good sign that that's not good.
Back in the day, speaking of the cryptography aspect of it, back in the day, Microsoft was one of the first companies to license RSA's technology, and so they've had cryptographic systems within their operating system since the very early beginning.
Yeah.
Right. And then they've adopted Kerberos, on top of that, and just that stuff alone gets super complex.
Lots of problems with that.
It ties into my story number one. And, this one talks about relying on a single vendor for both infrastructure and security is not good for your business. They say we need to start making a hacker's job harder and not easier. We can do this by employing best-of-breed security practices in all segments of the infrastructure via security products and services that are independent of the underlying infrastructure. Agree? Disagree?
Gee, that's such a deep topic, right? I had this series of conversations with Paul Vixie at Way West Hackenfest, and this is related. He's bemoaning the fact that the industry in general seems to be abandoning the idea of open standards, right? Abandoning the idea of interoperability, and all these different vendors are trying to go for lock-in. And once they lock you into a technology vertical stack, it's very difficult to escape. We, as an information security professional, I do believe it's in our interest to maintain an open, interoperable platform environment, because I would agree you need to be able to pick best of breed, but to be able to pick best of breed, you need to have interoperability. To have interoperability, you've got to stop this trend of vendors locking in for their purposes of data surveillance and so on. So it's a very, very difficult discussion. That story just opens up Pandora's box.
That's why I added it.
But that's against the basic sort of mentality of a company, though, is they want to put you in that vertical stack and lock it all in and lock everybody out as much as possible. It's just I don't agree with it. I agree with Joff that that openness is what protects you, because it's vetted and you can find the best in breed, but that's hard to do.
Well, one could also make the argument that rather than securing a suite of a dozen or more products, that you go all in on a more integrated platform and you focus on securing that. And yes, it's more of a single point of failure, but I'd rather be with the devil I know than 8 million devils that I don't know and don't, to Joff's point, want to work together.
Yeah, so
disparate applications cause problems.
Yeah, that opposing view is also driven, I think, in somewhat by sort of an executive level idea that, why don't I go down that road with one vendor, because then I've got one throat to choke, right? I've heard that statement many times.
Yeah, I don't think that's the reason.
If this thing blows up, I know who I'm going to sue. They're right there, right? And I get it. It's a tough thing, but I think heterogeneous interoperability is still a critical important thing in our industry, because best of breed emerges, I truly believe, emerges out of healthy competition.
I keep coming back to Paul's point about how much time do you want to spend integrating these 17 best of breed products versus having one that works. And I like the open. I don't like the vendor lock-in, but doggone it, sometimes you got to figure out what you can get deployed and get doing its job. I mean, I've been in many cases where we've done some integration of what's supposed to be, along open interfaces, and lost a year because it didn't actually work.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is having vendors understand the full suite and the full capabilities between and how all the systems interact together with what data is important, where data lives, how users single sign-on, all of these things integrate and work together. Having a single vendor is not often bad because they understand the full scope. If they're a good vendor, they'll understand the full scope of how things work, and that allows them a bigger picture to then secure that in a much broader manner.
But counterpoint, no single vendor is going to be strong in all areas. I mean, I've never seen
this is true.
Yeah. But I mean, my experience has been that if the minute you start bolting stuff on, it gets just so complicated. I mean, I conceptually I completely agree, but practically it's so hard to do. I mean, but yeah, there's always going to be bad things and good things mixed together.
Yeah, I think you need to make the decisions between platforms and applications as well. Mm-hmm. I'm a big proponent of, if you're going to use AWS, for example, you should centralize all your AWS resources. You should create security policies and procedures and roles within AWS and be all in on that platform. You better have a damn good justification if you want an app that's going to cross multiple different platforms, going to Google Cloud, going to Azure. I think you have an easier time streamlining your operations and securing them when you're all in on one platform, right? Now, that doesn't mean I can't take now disparate applications and put them on that particular platform, but I think there's a happy medium between the number of platforms that you have and the number of applications that you have. I don't think you want to swing, and I think this is the kind of nuance that the article missed. You don't want to swing too far in either direction. You don't want to go, our platform's AWS and our application is giant security vendor XYZ, and giant provider X, ABC.
But there have been these great migrations down through the history of technology where you saw these very diverse times where they had, 3 different apps. Like there used to be this thing where they had WordPerfect and Lotus and DBase and all this stuff. And then there was this great migration over to Microsoft because they said, we got it all, come over here. One-stop shopping, and everybody migrated and they packed their bags and they said, okay, that's it, Lotus, see ya. And they moved over to Excel and all this. And
but that's back to Josh's point is it's not necessarily interoperability. You want the ability to lift and shift and move.
Yeah,
and
that's what I'm saying.
Switch applications.
And I think there's going to be another great migration coming soon where people are going to migrate to this cloud-based world, which is going to tend to be all-encompassing because they don't want to do this 19 times with different things. They want to say, okay, when we do this, we're just doing the whole thing at once, and we're going to pack our bags, and we're going to go over to the other side, and that'll happen. I don't know what it will be. I could guess, but there's stuff coming from AWS, there's stuff from Azure, and one of those groups is going to sort of roll this all into a big sticky ball. And they're going to hand it to you and say, here it is, AI enabled. And everybody's going to say, all right, let's pack our tents and we're going to put up a new flag.
Right. And I think it's not every organization that has to necessarily abide by I need to be fluid with which cloud provider, for example, that I use. I think it depends. You got to make smart decisions. And it's not an easy thing to do. And when you're looking at an application and or service, and you have to make the decision, am I going to deploy this in a container or am I going to go deeper and use cloud native services, which ties into my other article, right? I'm not using EC2 as a platform, right? I'm not using Lambda and serverless as a platform. I'm going somewhere in between. I'm going to run my container. And I can always pick up my container. I can go run my container wherever I want. And I've seen a lot of software companies make that decision because they want that flexibility and ability to maybe not move all their application, but maybe these other containers, they can run the services over here and over here. And for some, some companies, that makes sense. I think for a lot of us, you need to be all in on a platform.
A lot of companies are going to say, this is an old thing, but we are an IBM shop. or we're an HP shop.
Oh, that's
and you know, the minute you start saying, well, we'll have the IBM people will be in this room and the HP people will be in that room, and the DEC people are down the hall, you start saying we got 3 separate organizations on this site, and we don't want to train everybody.
Then you get silos, and you get into
and everybody just
unicorn project,
and they just really want to say we just want to get in the one tent and stay in the one tent as long as we can. And so
the whole discussion though is so much more complicated in the 21st century. Because so many of the software services that are being sold now are actually a wolf in sheep's clothing. And the reason they are is you get the service. What you don't know is all your data is being mined on the back end for the purposes of surveillance capitalism. And this is something we have to have regulation on. I mean, it's gotten out of control. And that makes me, frankly, throw my hands up in the air and go, fuck it. I'm running my own gear on my own hardware with my own damn compiled kernel. I mean, you know, I get to the point where it's like everything I'm doing is becoming mined and surveilled. It's wrong, and nobody's doing anything about it. You know, that it becomes a really complex discussion when you map that over it, and you can't help but want to map that over it because that's the reality of the world we're living in.
I completely agree. That's how we know the size of your uvula.
I didn't know I had a uvula.
Is that like a uvula?
A uvula.
A uvula. It's my uvula.
I was going to say something, and then we started talking about uvulas or whatever it was.
We'll wait till we're off camera for the rest of that discussion.
I do the great disconnect, so.
Oh, I don't. I also look at things like Salesforce as an example, and I think that's part of the vendor lock-in, right?
Yep.
Job that you talk about is you can't just go buy something like Salesforce without heavy customization, which ties you to that platform. Yep. And
awesome business model.
It is an awesome business model. At the same time, it makes it hard to be fluid and leave and have interoperability and all those things.
I mean, look at Active Directory. I mean, can you imagine trying to get in that marketplace? It's like,
well, Jump Cloud is just
I mean, they're trying, but I mean, it's really got a tough sell.
Props to them. I mean, they've done some really innovative things.
They did, but it's so hard to sell. I mean, you can even bring out a better product that people are going.
They're a sharp team too. I met with that team. They're a sharp team.
Absolutely, but it's just so tough to get people to switch gears because they're like, we have to retrain everybody, we have to tear everything down and rebuild it.
Not even a better product, right? If you go in the Wayback Machine, you know, Novell eDirectory was a better product than Active Directory by far. Right?
But it had the word Novell in it, so that had
that's the problem. It was too novel.
What happened? But that was the same. We had this conversation 20 years ago when we had Active Directory, or Active Directory was just becoming a thing, and you still had Novell on the network. And Novell, worked really good. Like when you talk about file shares and
sophisticated directory,
right? There was a really
but
awesome.
It wasn't routable.
Yeah, that's the thing. They got stuck to their own protocols.
Oh boy, did they ever get stuck? IPX, SPX.
Yep.
No, Doug,
I remember that.
I can route anything. I routed IPX.
I did too. Oh, because we worked at universities, and universities all had Novell.
I routed it too, but that didn't mean it was easy, and that didn't mean people wanted to do it.
Oh, it was an awful thing.
Especially when somebody else over there waving a little flag in front of you going, you could fire all those bastards in the Novell room if you want to buy our product. And, they were like, oh, we hate those guys.
Yeah, we retrained them on Active Directory, much to their chagrin.
We fired them.
But you were nicer than we were.
Anybody remember the days where you had the crossover of the Windows login Gina that had to interoperate with Novell and Active Directory?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
It was a freaking nightmare.
But IPX SPX was a really good protocol, though.
Yeah, except that it wasn't routable.
Yeah.
It's a layer 2 protocol, but it's awesome.
It was awesome.
No, it was very effective as long as you got a big, fat network. So
yeah.
If you want to run
it, you could route it, Doug.
You can route it. It was a pain in the ass.
It was a pain, and you could bridge it. You could do all kinds of nasty tricks with it, but it was always a nasty trick. And there was marketing people out there going, guys, we use TCP/IP, the sexiest AI-enabled network stack around. So get on board the TCP/IP.
But now I remember, because I remember looking at router configs, and I was like, what is that?
IPX IDs, subnet IDs, and I ran a network for a while that had I couldn't even remember the counter protocols. It had DECnet on it. It had IPX, IP. It had
token ring,
LAT,
maybe.
Yeah.
We had a token ring network. We had DECnet. We had the thing called Music, which was a custom protocol that was written, and all those things had to, there was this sort of a smoking cesspool where they all blended together, and somebody had to tease all the threads out.
Yeah, God forbid you got a broadcast storm of that shit because your network was going down.
Yeah, that's when your hubs look like a stereo system, and the little collision indicators are going bop, 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 bop. Yeah, yummy.
Good old days.
Yeah, I tell you.
Speaking of Cisco and routing ASA devices, proof of concept code was published online by a researcher. They just said, screw it, and published the proof of concept for CVE 2020-3580, which is a cross-site scripting vulnerability. Also, apparently, a CSRF in there as well, is what one Twitter commenter was saying.
Well, that combination is usually juicy.
It is usually juicy. Yep.
I put that management management port on there for a reason.
There is a thing with web management interfaces and IO. I mean,
they were never
really
intended. No, I know they were. You're not supposed to show those things to anybody. Jeez, put on some clothes. Give me a break.
Again,
but there's got to be a better way to do that.
Infrastructure, like I did this for years. I'm back in the university days again. I ran a completely separate out-of-band network for those interfaces.
That's what you're supposed to do.
What you're supposed to do.
Like, you're supposed to have a management network and a management VLAN, and if you look at all the literature, they will tell you that. It's in the instructions.
But what did the VMS mainframe guy come to me with the request? Hey, can we bridge that network to production? God damn it.
Well, yeah, and that VLAN stuff gets so complicated, because it's like you have to type.
What do you mean I have to have a separate station? Can I dual plumb?
Yeah, I want to run that on my iPad while I'm in my car having lunch. And then the next thing you know, somebody calls down and goes, just do it. You go, but no, just do it. I'm like,
but isn't there better management frameworks than like the web interface built into a lot of these devices, right? I feel like that is also an option in some of
it's called SSH.
Yeah. I mean, you can
you can manage from the command.
But my God, then they have to use the command line. They don't have buttons to click.
Yeah, well, if you're managing a lot of big firewall policies and stuff like that.
It is hard. I mean, I will tell you, ASA is tough to manage without using ASDM or something. So,
but if you got a basic config,
but you got to put it in a management network. Come on. Make them log into that. It just drives me crazy.
But then you get on the management network, and if you haven't patched your stuff, it's
and then if you make if the password to the management network is admin, it's like and they all share it, and your
cross-site scripting is the least of your worries.
Yeah, it is. You're right. So maybe just expose it all.
You know what? Not my circus, not my monkeys today, right? I guess get to hack it now. So
the question is, though, I mean, do you publish the proof of concept or not? I mean, they saw a massive uptick in people exploiting this vulnerability because they hadn't fixed it.
They won't patch it, so it's like Mimikatz. I mean, why Mimikatz came about because the guy tried to do a good job. He tried to tell Microsoft, and they wouldn't fix it. So he was like, "All right, here we go."
And then the Russians tried to steal that stuff.
Yeah.
Where did I read that? Where did I read that story where he was presenting? Who's the guy that created Mimikatz?
Benjamin Delphi.
Yeah, Delphi. Yeah. He was in Russia presenting at a conference, as the story goes, right? And he found someone in his hotel room, and they were trying to get it from his laptop. And at that point, he was kind of like, yeah, no, this is going public domain. Like, if I'm going to have this and the Russians are going to try and have this,
better get it out there.
I'm just going to get it out there. It's going to be open,
it's
right?
Like PGP.
Yes.
They're going to steal it from me one way or the other. I'm just going to turn it loose.
Well, that was a different reason.
I know, but it's the same idea. It's kind of the same idea.
That was a different.
But I mean, it's still like somebody's going to take
proxy. He had someone put that out on.
Yeah, but they're going to take this away from me if I don't just give it to everybody, and then they're going to try to use it against me. So he didn't want, he didn't want everybody. He didn't want the government to have it when nobody else did. So he just said
the government didn't want anyone to have it at that time.
Right, they want to lock it up and use it themselves. But so he said, all right, everybody gets it.
Which is scary. I mean, we can't get to that. This one thing that does scare me about the government is their kind of history of wanting to control cryptography systems, And also
Clipper what?
Yeah, Clipper. They were implementing some of that shit too. But also wanting to control vulnerabilities and exploits, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's why I kind of lean towards, you know what, if you got to publish the proof of concept so it's out there and we all know how the attack works and we can all come up with creative ways to defend against it, like it may not be leveling the playing field to a certain extent, but it's got to be out there, much like cryptographic systems. It's got to be out there.
I would make the argument that a well-architected security shop, secured shop with, multiple layers of defense and the right options, kind of response, right? They're going to be okay.
Yeah.
They're going to be okay.
I would rather know about it than not know about it, even if it's not patched. So I would much rather read that proof of concept to go, okay, how do we fix this? They're not going to fix it. What do I need to do to mitigate this?
I've always felt that way too.
In today's era, with as many security companies as there are, and as fast as the security community reacts to these things, like it seems like it is a better way to do that from rather than have it in the shadows. I would much rather have companies reacting. At least, even if it's bad advice, you can build upon more information than no information.
I completely agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, now that we settled that issue,
case closed.
Case closed. Any other stories in there? Is Lee still with us? Lee had to drop.
He did.
Well, he did. There is a big story. It's America's birthday this weekend.
Yes.
It is.
It is. That is not really a story, but well, there is a story behind that.
So get your vodka and fireworks ready.
That's right. Well, any public holiday in the States is always an excuse to buy the next most exotic booze that you can get your hands on.
Fireball Plus. Peppermint.
And how can you go wrong when you mix explosive with that, right?
It's a party waiting to happen.
God bless America.
Hey, they have a tradition where I live in Rhode Island that all up and down the bay, all the neighborhoods have a giant bonfire. Mm-hmm. And when I first moved here, I took my little daughter and we went down there to see it. And basically what it was a bunch of really, really drunk people with pickup trucks full of fireworks backed up to this big bonfire, started pouring gasoline out of 5-gallon cans on it, and threw all the fireworks in the fire. Mm-hmm. We pretty much ran like hell. I was like, I'm either not drunk enough or too drunk to really appreciate this, so we're getting the hell out of here. Mm-hmm. It was quite interesting.
Right there typifies just about every small town in America this weekend.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, wow, don't work in the ER this weekend.
Well, happy 4th, everyone. Yeah. Come back with all your fingers because we need them to do our jobs to secure the world. So
there you go.
With that, thank you, everyone, for listening and watching to this edition of Paul Security Weekly. Over and out.